the heart and soul behind every business. Stories. Welcome to Business Story of the Week, hosted by me, Joshua Laurie. From setbacks to comebacks, from tragedies to triumphs, we inspire entrepreneurs through conversations that matter. Witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. Whether it's your career, business, or life, your success is always one story away. This is Business Story of the Week. And welcome back, folks. Welcome back to Business Story of the Week. I am your host, Joshua. And today's question is: how can the same skills that built a business become its greatest weakness? Now, it's quite a flip question to that, but we'll get into that today. I promise you. Um, and our guest is the perfect big person, the perfect guest to answer that question today. Bradley Hammer started his first business in 2009 with no customers, no leads, and very little cash. But he did have a desire to win and succeed. After working around the clock for 5 years, Bradley had a health scare in his 30s. Knowing something had to change, he focused on building his leadership first, and then he began architecting his business to work for him. This led him to designing the ultimate operating system for business owners, Blueprint OS. This framework has empowered business owners to move successfully from Rainmaker to architect in their business. Now, Bradley is a business growth coach, certified value builder, and host of the Above the Business podcast. Each week, he shows other entrepreneurs and business owners how to install the system, processes, and routines their business needs to grow and scale. The ultimate outcome: business owners have a successful business that creates the freedom and flexibility they desired from the start. And today, Bradley is going to share all his insights, perspectives, and wisdom with us in this episode. Bradley, how are you doing? Thank you for being on the show.
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you, Joshua.
Bradley, this the topic of yours is perfect for the audience. This is exactly what we look for. Like when you start a business, you're an entrepreneur. Everyone always has a dream of like, I want to own my time. I want that flexibility in my time. Um, but everyone, it's not so easy. It's only easy on paper. It's only easy when we start thinking about it. It's quite difficult when we're actually in it because it's so hard to kind of let go of our business, especially if it's our baby. But Bradley, before we really get into it, you started your first business in 2009. Very little, but very passionate, like many of our audience and listeners today. Can you share the story of your early days? What inspired you to transition from being a rainmaker to an architect? But more than that, did you always know as a child you were going to be a business owner or a business coach? What is the story of Bradley Hammer?
Yeah. I don't have this. I have a background with my dad being an entrepreneur and a small business owner. So he
Mhm.
is in the farming or agriculture space. And so my journey really does start back to my dad. Rainmaker to Architect obviously came a lot later, but it honestly came from a lot of failures that I had early on. And I needed to solve my own problems first. What I learned from my dad, they say a lot of times that things are caught, not taught. And so I saw firsthand what it took from my dad and how hard he works. And by the way, still to this day, my dad's 69, he'll turn 70 in less than a year. He really runs laps around most people in terms of how hard he works. And so I picked that up from my dad.
Mhm.
I mean, when you're in the farming industry, when you have to get crops planted, when you have to harvest in the fall, you have to do whatever it takes. And so my dad was an agriculture teacher from for 29 years, I believe. And so from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock, I say back then he was wearing duckhead pants, and then he would change into his duckheads, put his overalls on, and then they would go to what's called the seed plant, Clemson Hamner seed. And they were, doing seed conditioning or cleaning. So for other farmers bringing their crops out of the field.
Okay.
And so my dad missed a lot of my basketball games. He missed a lot of my baseball games growing up. And so, I'd see him briefly on the weekends, but, my dad and I to this day have a great relationship, but he sacrificed a whole lot to be able to provide for our family. And so when I started my business, I had this desire that I felt like I wanted to get into entrepreneurship and owning my own business, but I really didn't know what that was going to be. Right. And so I fell into an opportunity to start an insurance agency as my first business. But that just kind of fell into my lap. I mean, it wasn't some desire like I'm going to go start this type of business, but because I thought I was going to go the corporate route. I was working for a corporate pharmaceutical company at the time, and that's the route that I was going to go. Right. And so the lever that I had to push on was exactly the lever that I needed initially in the business, which was hard work. And so I did. And my previous career, I had been in sales. And so I really had two things. I knew how to put in long hours. I knew what it took to work hard, and I was young. And so I could obviously do that. I didn't have a family, but really early on, kids come into the picture, et cetera. Well, eventually at some point, a few years later, that lever is now on the ground, meaning I'm working as many hours as I can. And I think this is really an important distinction.
Yes.
My health scare was because things were working and I ran out of time, not because they were not working. So I think the initial thought, Josh, is that people think, oh, well, you're working all these hours because things aren't working. No, they weren't working.
Yep.
And so, but eventually I simply started to run out of time. And so the end story, I had my first panic attack. I went and saw a doctor, and he puts me in an EKG machine and says, you know what, Bradley, I think we see some things here on this. Now I'm in a full-blown panic. I go see a cardiologist. I do a stress test where I'm on the treadmill, and they said, look, there's nothing wrong with your heart, but at 34 years old, if you're this stressed out, you need to change something. But here's the thing. I did not know what to change because I only knew one thing, which was just to work harder. Well, then what do you do when that option is no longer on the table? And so a few months after that, I fortunately had been in a program called Strategic Coach. You may have heard Strategic Coach. And so great entrepreneurial program Dan Sullivan has created. And so I'm actually in the wrong class, and I'm in the wrong class because the timing didn't work out for me to be in my class. And so I'm sitting next to an entrepreneur, and we're doing the exercise, which is the 10X exercise. And Dan has actually just in the past year come out with this book called 10X is Easier Than 2X. But we're doing that exercise. Okay. And so the guy I'm sitting next to, I'd never met before. And I remember how, number one, he was super fit. He had been a former Major League Baseball player for a long time. And he was really relaxed, and he was dressed casual. And so we do this exercise, and then we get into small groups, and he does it first. He says, well, last year we made 40 million top line revenue. I made 5 million personally. So basically here's what it would look like at 400 million. And if I made 50 personally. And so he just does this on a one pager, and he says, okay, Bradley, now you go. And I said, what are you talking about? I'm not about to go. Like my numbers are a joke compared to your numbers. And then he said something that we've all heard before. He said, look, man, I was where you've been. And Joshua, he said, systems and processes. And I basically rolled my eyes and said, come on, man. I've heard that for so long, and nobody ever shows me what that's like. And I was probably fairly snarky about it. And he said, well, look, at lunch, I'll show you. And so he did. And that changed my life, because then when he actually showed me that he got his business out of his head and what it actually took to get his business to where it is, that was a moment that you fundamentally realize, like you see the world differently. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh,
Mm.
nobody has ever shown me that. That's
Right.
actually what it takes to be able to do it. And so hence the rest of history. Now it took me a long time. Okay. It wasn't perfect up and to the right from that point, but I began to actually kind of figure out, okay, this is actually how you do
This
this.
is
And
it.
so I went from being the rainmaker of my own business. I became the architect that designed it. I built it because I realized that at that point I had not really designed what I had just defaulted into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I began to change it, but it takes time to be able
It
to do
does
that.
take
And so
time.
that's obviously where I spend a lot of my time now is helping
Right.
other small business owners do the same thing.
Well, and then, of course, there's a lot to unravel there. But first of all, I love the part where you said that, you know, people have heard this often, systems and processes, but yeah, just put it in a system. Just have a process around it, etc. And it's never quite concrete, right? But also, you said that you were working in your business not because you didn't have time or that it wasn't working, rather, but you were putting all that time in there. That's why it was working so good. I think this is why
Mm-hmm.
most entrepreneurs and business owners have trouble stopping, because wow, everything's going well. And it's because I'm involved. I'm constantly, you know, putting my time in the business. And naturally, of course, it feels like as soon as I stop, as soon as I take myself out of this picture in my business, everything is going to come to a halt, which is also
Yep.
true. But I think that is a difficulty in there. Like, we think that we are the system, we are the
Yep.
process, and no one, it's not transferable. It's difficult to transfer those skills. It takes so much time to transfer their skills. And why would I when I can just do it here? But the problem is, and I think you talk about this, you call this the Rainmaker's dilemma. The problem is, you feel like you are making a lot more money than for being there, but you're actually losing. You're actually leaving money on the table by not taking yourself out as a bottleneck and instead replacing yourself with a cohesive system and process. But the question now is, or rather, the next step is what everyone's probably going to be asking: what is a system? What is a process? But before we answer that question, Bradley, the Rainmaker's dilemma is a core concept in your methodology.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain this dilemma first and foremost, and why it entails, and what it entails, and why it poses such a significant challenge for many entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So the dilemma is the same thing that I went through.
Mhm.
What I have been doing has been working up until the point it does not work anymore.
Mhm.
And so, therefore, the thing that is needed to get the business off the ground initially, your work ethic, your drive, your ambition, just your enthusiasm, at some point, you are going to run out of time because the business is going to grow. Here's an
Yes,
analogy for you.
please.
In I'm not a space nerd, although I live in Huntsville, Alabama, where the Space and Rocket Center is. And in space, though, we know that small things rotate around big things. The
Yes,
Earth
of course.
rotates around the sun, as an example. The moon rotates around the Earth, right? Does that make sense?
Mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
Well, early on, the business rotated around me.
Yes, of course.
What happens though when the business grows and then the business grows beyond your capacity? Now
Mhm.
the business begins to sling you around, and that's what happened.
There
And
you
so the
go.
dilemma is, wait a minute, the prevailing thought in the marketplace is do the things that you are good at and just continue to do those. Well,
Mhm,
I did.
mhm.
Now what do I do? It's not
Mm.
working anymore. Okay.
Right.
And so I have to begin to replace myself. And this is where an operating system is not a concept,
Mhm.
it is an actual thing.
There
It's
you
not a concept. It's not a mental model. I love mental
go.
models, by the way. It's not a mental model. It is an actual thing to where
Mhm.
you actually replace yourself. And specifically, I want to say, even furthermore to that, what you really do is you actually upgrade your operating system. So here's the way to think about it. The way to think about it is in the beginning, you are the operating system, and the operating system is you. So we
Mm.
call that a UOS. And so what you
Okay.
then have to do is upgrade the operating system to an operating system that is not you. Does that make sense?
Wow. Okay, that is pretty cool. That's a great way to put it. Okay, so UOS first. You're starting with a UOS, but
Yep.
like every other operating system, you need to upgrade. You need to update this. So you need
That's
to
right.
go from a UOS to a not UOS, so to speak, where it doesn't revolve around you, where the update revolves into an actual, system and process. I love that. I love that it doesn't revolve around you anymore, because eventually that thing grows big enough for it to sling you around instead of you
That's
taking
right.
control of it. So now brings us to Blueprint OS. You develop Blueprint OS as a framework to help business owners systematize their operations. And again, this is concrete. It's not just a concept. Like just do it. Systems, operations. Just put it together. I love that because it needs to be concrete. What are some of the key components of Blueprint OS, and how does it help business owners move from working in their business to working on it?
Yeah. Okay, great. And I'm going to start in the reverse of what you just mentioned.
Oh, please.
So, obviously, Gerber in the book E Myth introduced us to the idea of working on the business, not in it. And I agree. I also just think there's a third dimension, which is above the business, which is why my podcast is actually called Above the
Above the
Business. It is a
business. There
nod
you go.
to
Mhm.
Gerber. And so we believe for sure you need to work not just in it, but on it. I also think, though, you need to get above the business. And there are some things, and if you want to come back to this, we can certainly talk about like, okay, cool. Well, what are the things that are actually on, what are in, what is above?
Oh, I
So we can
love
talk
that.
about some of those elements. Okay. So we'll come back to that if we want to. All right. So specifically, you're right. I even had to make sense of, wait a minute, people are throwing around systems and processes and playbooks and all of these kind of things. What is the difference?
Mhm,
Well,
mhm.
do a quick Google search and you'll be more confused. You'll be
Oh,
more confused
of course.
because one thing that somebody calls a system, somebody else calls a process. And then
Yep.
somebody else calls a process. They
Mhm,
put that in, wait a minute, do I need a playbook or do I have one playbook? And so
mhm.
my first playbook actually was like, I don't know, 170 pages. It was in a 3-ring binder. That's the first
Mhm,
one I put together.
mhm,
And I was like, all right,
mhm.
this is our playbook. And guess what? It collected dust. I mean, nobody used the
Oh,
thing.
of
So
course.
then I was like, well, maybe maybe I'm doing this wrong. And so specifically, we use words, we attempt to
Right,
use words very, very intentionally. This means this, this means this. So
right.
specifically,
Yeah.
if you want to go from being the rainmaker to becoming the architect of your business, we believe that your business operating system runs on 15 playbooks.
15
It runs on
playbooks.
15, 15, 1 5,
Okay,
15.
15 playbooks. Okay,
So
okay.
even hopefully that alone gives people an understanding that, okay, there's not 725 playbooks out there. No, we think there needs to be 15. We have 5 principles. Okay,
Okay.
lead yourself first, clarity, alignment, team execution. Lead yourself
Right.
first, clarity, alignment, team execution. Those are our 5 principles. Each principle has 3 playbooks. Okay, so there you go.
Oh, there
So
you go.
first
There
of
you go.
all, that we call that our hierarchy. Okay, so
Hmm,
what's the
hmm,
hierarchy structure?
hmm.
I will go down into systems and processes in just a second, but hopefully just that we quite literally tell people to organize your file folders in your Google Drive, your Dropbox, your share folder, whatever digital folder system you use.
Hmm, hmm.
We actually share and encourage people to use that hierarchy of how to structure your folders. So that
Interesting.
way you can say, where does the OS live? It goes back to my point earlier, which is, wait a minute, is an OS a concept or a thing? No, it is a thing. It is a thing
Hmm,
to where you could share your screen and you could point to and say, there's my 5 principles, there's my 3 playbooks in each one of those folders. And that
interesting.
alone, I think, is really helpful for people. Now, our company, our OS runs inside of Notion. We use
Hmm.
Notion as our OS.
Love it.
However, I want to be very clear. We are agnostic to where you put your OS. It does not matter. We are not a
Of course.
Notion coaching consulting company. I personally love the tool. It doesn't matter, but it has to be in one specific place. So where you could point to and say, this is my operating system. And by the way, I want to share that
Please.
regardless if you were ever wanting to sell your company, if a business owner is wanting to get to a point to where they exit, if you are too dependent in your business, what you are going to be able to sell that business, even if you could sell the business, is largely dependent on how well you have developed an operating system that is not dependent upon you. And so if you're able to say, Joshua, here's my company. Here is exactly what you would be buying. This is exactly what you would be getting. This is how we do this. This is how we do this. This is how we do this. It exists right here. And so upon the transfer of the transaction, you would get access to that. And so hopefully that gives people, even if you don't have the desire to sell your company, you begin to kind of build a mental model of that is the same thing that would allow you to be able to get, which is what you talked about earlier, the freedom, the flexibility, and the income potential that ultimately all business owners and entrepreneurs want.
Precisely. And it's exactly why most of us started businesses, right? Because we
100%.
want that. But it's always an idea. It's always just a concept in our mind. We don't know how to really execute that. Run through us a little bit again, the 5 principles. I love that first one, which is lead yourself, clarity, teamwork, and then what are the rest?
Okay, good. Lead yourself first. Clarity, alignment, team, execution.
All right. Very, very interesting. I love, of course, the first part. And then I love that there's a hierarchy because literally that first one, I think, is the most important. You lead yourself first. And I feel like I'm going to go off a cuff here and try to relate that to what we want to talk about. But leading yourself first is so important because I'm always a firm believer of us above, so below, right? So how you're leading from up top is going to trickle down. People are going to see that. It's going to set the pace. It's going to, set the pace of everyone working of your business. Now, I think this relates back to, of course, we don't have time to go through all those 5 principles, but I also agree with the way that you put everything in a folder, put it in the proper hierarchy, and then you can start going like, oh, okay, so this is how I can arrange my system precisely. But I would love to focus on that very first one, which I think is so important. But I feel like it also starts to relate to the working in, working on, and working above. Talk to us a little bit about the hierarchy of leading yourself first. What does that entail, and why does it have 3 frameworks or 3 modules in it, right? Like, because there's 5, you have 15. Lead yourself first. What does that contain? Talk to us a bit about that, Bradley.
Yeah. All right. So great. Thank you for that. So I really look at lead yourself first as effectively a personal operating system for the founder, the owner, the business owner. Okay. The entrepreneur. So that is their personal operating system. I love the idea that, we have to be able to put our oxygen mask on first before we can help people. People have been on an airplane. You've heard that before. Okay. So that's a high level. Let's get down into some actual specific things of what that actually looks like.
Right.
So inside of that, we have a concept called MIT. MIT stands for the most important thing. The most important thing. So we say, what is the most important thing you can do for yourself?
Right.
What is the most important thing you can do for your team?
Right.
And what is the most important thing that you can do for the business? So again, lead yourself first is number 1, what's the most important thing you can do for yourself? Number 2, what's the most important thing you can give your team? And number 3, what is the most important thing that you can do for the business? And if you'd like, I can briefly kind of begin to go over what some of those things specifically are so that people can understand what is the most important thing I can do for myself, my team, and the business. So I think the most important thing that you can do for yourself as a business owner is to protect your confidence. Business is hard and it gets harder. Business is hard and gets harder. As a matter of fact, you said something at the very beginning that I'm glad this actually came back so I could double tap on this.
Please.
Is thinking it's going to be easy is what actually makes it hard, I believe. And so there's this idea like books written, business made simple. Well, it can. I believe in simplicity. I certainly don't believe in complexity in business.
Right.
But the reality is that simple does not mean it's going to be easy.
Right.
And so for a long time, I kept thinking like, oh my gosh, this is like this is so hard. This is so hard. And I kept thinking to myself, it's supposed to be easy. No, it's not supposed to be easy. It's why so many businesses fail. Joshua, 96% of small businesses in the US do not see their 10th birthday. Business is hard. Like nobody would argue that with me unless you are not a business owner. Any business owner will tell you, yeah, this crap is really, really hard. Right. So therefore, I think the most important thing you can do for yourself is to protect your confidence. Now that seems really woo-woo, but there are some specific things that we can do to actually be able to do that. So for instance, we have a rhythm called Sunday night planning. And the very first thing that you do is to look back on the wins from the previous week. Next week is week 13 of the quarter. The very first thing that we will do is go back and look at the wins that we had from the previous quarter. So that's one tidbit is I will always start the week, always looking at what were the wins, because it's really easy to find the losses. It's really easy to find the things that are not going as well. Okay, so concept number one, MIT, most important thing you do for yourself, protect your confidence. Number two,
your confidence.
What's the most important thing you can give your team? I actually think it's your energy. I think it's your energy. Because they're going to feed off of you one way or the other. I was actually with a business owner the other day. They were running their weekly business review, and I was sitting in. The business owner came in just really in a foul mood. I'm just be honest with you. He was in a foul mood. I don't know what had been going on. Might not have gotten sleep the night before. And it affected everybody. Even my energy started to get affected about it. And I was thinking to myself like, wow, holy cow, you can feel the tension because he's in a bad mood. And so therefore, by the way, we're human. We're going to have bad days. Okay. Let's be real. But I do think that whether we like it or not, as the owner, as the entrepreneur, the team is going to feed off of our energy, and you can't give what you don't have. So there are things that take your energy. There are things that give you energy. There are things that take your energy in the business. Okay. So number one, most important thing you can do for yourself, protect your confidence. Number two, most important thing you can do for your team, give them your energy. Number three, most important thing I think you can do for the business is to think about the business. And I want to give full credit to Keith Cunningham for changing my life in this. This is portrayed in his book, The Road Less Stupid, which is my favorite business book of all time. So I really recommend people. But I adopted that, and that is definitely one of the concepts that is absolutely critical. When people actually will spend an hour to 90 minutes once a week with a notepad and a pen or a pencil, and they will spend time intentionally thinking about their business, then they can go about designing, building, and installing a business that runs without them. But a lot of times we don't do it. It's one of those good ideas, but we just don't get around to do it. So that's the MIT framework. Most important thing for you, your team, and the business.
Okay, and I love that. Okay, first of all, this is exactly what I was asking you. It's like, how do you lead yourself? How do you lead your team? It's broken down into three different parts, and it's an easier way to follow for everybody if you know exactly what you're giving back, what you're giving to yourself first, and it's just a clear framework for everyone and for entrepreneurs out there. Bradley, it's been such a great episode. I love that all this insight that you've given us so far. Of course, I want to be able to dig deeper into all of this, but I understand that you also have your own podcast. Again, the name of the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, is Above the Business Podcast, and I welcome you all to check that out. Bradley, for us to start wrapping this up, I want to talk to you about that and talk to us to about that concept we touched up a little on the difference between working in the business, on the business, and you taking it to another level of working above the business. Now, the concept it seems obvious, right? When you start talking about it that way, like with the soon as you hear it, you kind of understand, like, all right. But you also talk about protecting your confidence. What if, say, me, someone who is a business owner, I'm quite hardworking, but I figured out my systems right away. I figured out how to work above my business right away, and I experienced success. How do I protect my confidence in a way of, say, of imposter syndrome, right? I didn't work hard enough for this. I already replaced myself with systems right away. Is that a common challenge that you face with your clients, something that you coach them constantly with? But at the same time, am I correct when I say that when you work above your business, is there still a potential that you get consumed in the business? Is there still a risk for that? So talk to us a little bit about that.
I don't think that you get consumed whenever you're above the business. I think where you get inundated, consumed, overwhelmed is when you're in the business all the time. So the
Right.
only time that you spend. So I want to be clear that we're not advocating for people to just live up in the clouds, only be above 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's not reality. There are
Right.
times that I am absolutely 100% in today as a good example. I deliver in my programs on Tuesdays. And so for that 3 hours on a Tuesday, I'm in the business. That is classic in the business. I have a handful of private coaching clients that I work with. When I'm in those sessions, that is in the business.
Right.
Absolutely. Okay. When we have our weekly business reviews, our WBRs every Monday, those are on the business. We're working on the business. When I'm having my one-to-ones or my weekly syncs with my marketing manager, my sales team
On the
lead, my
business.
client success manager, all of those are on the business type things.
Mm-hmm.
When we've got retreats that we do twice a year, and so we'll do a jam session with our entire team, planning for when we're going to Big Cedar Lodge in Missouri coming up in October. That's all on the business stuff. Okay.
There you
When
go.
I am away by myself, whenever I have time and I go to Starbucks, because I can't do it in my office, so I go to Starbucks and I'm spending time with my notebook and I'm intentionally planning, I'm journaling, I'm writing
Yep.
things out about the business. I'm actually doing some of what Cal Newport calls the deep work. That's whenever I'm starting to get above the business. When I go to a conference, when I'm in my coaching program, the
Mm-hmm.
programs that I'm a part of, when I go
Mm-hmm.
to the masterminds that I'm in. By the way, I think never trust a coach who doesn't have a coach. So when
I
I'm doing
agree.
those things for me, I'm above the business. I'm able to get away from it. I'm not on it. I'm not in it. I'm above it. Okay. There's times when I go on a run, go on a walk, and I'm listening to your podcast.
Mm.
Okay. Listening to other people's podcast. I'm above it. I'm disconnected a lot of times. I'm not working on it. Okay. If I'm putting content together specifically, that's on it for sure. But when I'm actually thinking, that's an interesting concept, and I'm listening to some other people, my mentors, that I subscribe to, then I'm above the business. So I think when people are even listening to this podcast, hopefully it's allowing them to kind of get and rise above. And so I think that what we end up doing is that we need to be week in and week out, intentionally allocate our time to do all three. We need
Right.
to have time above, we need to have time on, and we need to have time in. And so I think that's more of a reality. I mean, look, I don't ever try to take a contrarian take because that's clickbaity. Okay. So I don't,
Right. Right.
that's not my personality. But
Mm-hmm.
I think, like, if you think around the book Traction, that Gino Wickman wrote, and he did it a lot for this idea of, become the visionary of the
Yes.
business.
Yeah.
What I often see though is the business owner says, I'm the visionary. I'm just going to go around visionating all over the place. And you're like, yeah, but you have to do some work, like
Yes,
you
of
still
course.
have things to do,
Mhm.
and you can't just be the visionary all the time, like living
Yes,
in
of
la
course.
la land. And so
Mhm.
hopefully people can hold both of those. You need to
Mhm.
spend time above, you need to spend time on, and you need to be able to spend time in.
I love that. I love that concept because most oftentimes, entrepreneurs start thinking that, oh, I will achieve my dreams when I'm above the business 100% of the time. But it's just not the way it is, right? Like the
No.
concept is always like, I'm just up here, everything's running for me, it doesn't work that way. I love that you reminded us of that, but also it's relieving in such a way that, oh, okay, if you're the type of workaholic that can't keep themselves out of the business, there will be instances that you can still be involved, very, very intimately involved into the business, but just as important to be away from the business and taking in all those different times to kind of just, you know, take a bird's eye view, so to speak. Bradley, as much as I would love to keep digging into your entire concept, into your blueprint concept, the blueprint OS, we need to start wrapping this up. But before I do, I'd love to give you this opportunity. Where can we find this operating system of yours? Where can we connect with Bradley Hammer himself? Where are you most active in? Please let us know.
Well, great. Well, thank you for that, Joshua. So we have got some tools that we use for our members that we would love to be able to give you to you.
Oh,
So if you go to
please.
blueprintos.com
Mm-hmm.
/assets, blueprintos.com /assets, there you'll be able to see some of the tools that we use in our
Mm-hmm.
programs with our
Mm-hmm.
members,
Mm-hmm.
as well as some training videos that go along with those. So just go to blueprintos.com /assets, and you can get access to those. And we'd love to be able to send those over to you, and hopefully they serve you. One of our core values, one of our core four values, is to provide value first and over deliver. And so I appreciate the opportunity to hopefully provide to your audience, and would love to be able to get some tools in their hands as well.
Wow, that's lovely. To all our audience and listeners out there, be sure to check that out. If this resonated with you, it certainly did with me. And I know a lot of audience and listeners out there are looking for this very answer. Bradley, a lot, a lot. There's a lot of them, I bet. But Bradley, thank you so much for joining us today. One last bit of wisdom to leave the audience and listeners. Take us home.
Ideas are everywhere. Implementation is everything. Ideas are
Wow.
everywhere. Implementation is everything. It's not what you know, it's what you do.
That's it. That's it right there. Bradley, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you so much for sharing all that insight and wisdom.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Fantastic. To all our audience and listeners out there, see you on the next one.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.